So yeah, Shadow Priest. We are here in 8.1 to enjoy the supposed glory of the insane Priest spec. Priest and Rogue are my least played classes of all time, so I kept up with their class fantasy less so than others. But I did become a huge fan of Priest, I think back when they got surrendered to madness. Boy, that spell was so cool! We are getting sidetracked a bit, so is Shadow Priest good in 8.1? Should you play it? Well, let's check the changes together before we make an informed decision. In terms of performance, it's no surprise Shadow Priest has been a little meh throughout BFA. But of course, the wonderful and insightful community has classified Shadow as broken and unplayable. And although that holds some level of truth, we can clearly see that the performance of Shadow simply decreases with the difficulty of the game. The only real issue I can see is in Mythic Plus, where they are simply ugh. On the plus side, the negativity present towards Shadow, similar to Shaman, has pushed Blizzard to treat the so-called broken spec with some form of urgency. If you can call the first patch of an expansion urgency. Although there are arguments present regarding the level of changes and if the classes are where they currently should be. But that's a different story for a different video. Today we will take a look at the technical changes of the spec, with February being most likely the best time to judge if the spec can actually perform with the top boys in endgame rating. I will talk about the changes mostly from a PvE perspective, since mainly I am a PvEer, but I will cover the PvP changes as well. Though I'm not that knowledgeable about PvP to make informed affirmations, more so than what I've seen pro players play. If you are new to Shadow and want to understand these changes better, let me be very brief and explain the basics of Shadow, the only DPS spec of the Priest. Shadow Priest comes with the Shadow Form stance that you can activate to increase overall spell damage. As you do damage with your Shadow spells, your second resource Insanity builds up until it caps at 100. Insanity doesn't decay like Rage, but once you reach 100 you can cast the spell Void Eruption, dealing AoE damage and switching you to Void form as opposed to the previous Shadow form. During Void form, your Insanity decays rapidly, but you do increase damage and get a buff to your haste. This buff gives you 0.5% haste per second and it keeps growing so long as you are in Void form. The longer you stay in Void form, the faster your Insanity will start to decay until it eventually will be 0. While in Void form you can generate Insanity and it's basically a race to stay as much as you can without losing the buff, because once you reach 0 Insanity, Void form will go away and you will revert back to Shadow form. Also, the Void Eruption spell becomes Void Bolt, an instant cast spell on a short cooldown that deals damage and generates Insanity. There are of course details that we can go into, since most spells generate Insanity and certain spells change the priority of certain specs and how each phase of your playstyle plays. But that's for a more in-depth video about Shadow. So with that in mind, let's see the changes 8.1 brings to Shadow Priest. Well, for one thing, the Priest Shadow Aura, which is an in-game invisible passive that Blizzard controls to balance numbers, has been nerfed from minus 29% damage and healing modifier to minus 32%. But don't fret, the change is to align the rest of them, since the rest of them are pretty much buffs. To give you an idea of how the changes will affect Priest, and Priest, if I'm wrong, I trust you to correct me in the comments, Shadow evolved from Legion to a playstyle where they weren't incentivized to pop Void form anymore, and this is mostly for PvP, simply because Shadow form gave them an extra damage reduction. Initially Blizzard made them like this to give them some form of strength outside Void form, but the changes were going so much in this direction that the overall outcome was essentially the other side of the coin. As such, a major change comes to Shadow form, where it no longer gives you the 10% damage reduction. So essentially a stat nerf, but hopefully a playstyle buff. Power Word Shield has been changed for all specs and Shadow is not an exception. There is no cooldown on it anymore, but it does apply Weakened Soul for 7.5 seconds, during which time you cannot apply it again to the target in question. Also, its mana cost has been raised to 2.7% of your base mana, up from the 2.5%. Another more general change is the Focused Will passive, which Shadow did not have before. This passive essentially gives you 15% damage reduction for 8 seconds after being hit by melee attacks. This looks like something to counteract the Shadow form nerf, so in a way, well, in all ways, the toughness is buffed. Either way, Shadow Priest should be a bit more tanky now. Speaking of tankiness, Dispersion has been buffed to provide 75% damage reduction, up from 60%. Not only that, it will also increase movement speed by 50% on top of its already effect of making you immune to movement impairing effects. Mind Sear's damage scaling has also been buffed to deal 21.8% spell power damage, up from 18.1%. Note that this damage is multiplied by 4 when it actually comes out of your character and onto your enemy. Wow, it wasn't even intentional. I need to watch more Disney movies to wash away the internet from my scripts. Void Bolt, mentioned before, has been buffed to increase insanity gain to 20, up from 16. Damage numbers aside, we are seeing more and more a return to Void Form focused playstyle. Speaking of the Devil, Void Form is also seeing a buff to the bonus spell damage it provides. On 8.1, in Void Form you will have 20% increased damage, up from the 8.0 version, which gave you 10% only. Void Form City! And the last addition to the spellbook will be Hallucinations. Previously a PvP passive, now a universal one, it will generate 6 insanity whenever you dispel or use Vampiric Embrace successfully. It's similar to the Demon Hunter interrupt, where they get a resource upon successfully interrupting. We are seeing more of this type of mechanic, essentially Blizzard rewarding a very good play. Of course, spells and passives were not the only changes we got, but talents as well. Mania will be going away to be replaced with Intangibility. This new talent will buff Dispersion to also restore 50% of your max health for its duration and have its cooldown shortened by 30 seconds. To be honest, with my limited time playing Shadow, I never once felt compelled to pick Mania. I see what they were trying to do with the talent, but just seems too bland in 2018. I like the new addition. Legacy of the Void will be buffed as well. On top of its normal effect, it will increase Void Form damage by an additional 5%. Once more, a lot of focus on Void Form. Another small buff comes to Lingering Insanity to slow down the decay of haste to 1% every 3 seconds instead of every 2 seconds, essentially prolonging the buff with 50% more uptime. Mind Bomb talent gets a small increase in its disorient duration to now last for 6 seconds, up from the previous 5. Void Torrent, the former artifact ability, is getting pumped up to deal 360% spell power damage, up from the previous 300%. On top of this, it will generate 30 insanity over its duration. And my personal favorite, Surrender to Madness, has its cooldown reduced from 4 minutes to 3 minutes. After it expires, it prevents insanity generation for 15 seconds, while in previous iteration the penalty was 30 seconds. I like the concept of this talent and I really want to see it pumped to a stage where it can be used. I feel it adds a dynamic to the game that makes people uncomfortable. You essentially receive a major damage boost in the form of insanity generation, after which you take damage equal to 90% of your max health. Its past iteration provided a much bigger boost in power, but killed you at the end. Admittedly, it was hard for people to use it, but a lot of players have complained about a side of WoW that this type of talent was addressing, that side being boring, old, outdated. Time will tell though. Hopefully, if this talent rises up, we might see more talents that mess up the dynamic of the game to introduce more variety to the playstyles for a lot more classes. PvP talents have been addressed as well, of course. Edge of Insanity has been reworked. Its current iteration will activate upon reaching 90 insanity and it will buff you for 15 seconds with 10% extra damage dealt and 10% damage reduction. Pure Shadow, a talent that was buffing Dispersion, has been removed. Fair enough, we already got a baseline talent that buffs Dispersion, plus Dispersion has had its baseline version buffed as well. Lastly, let's talk about the Azerite traits, and Shadow has had the most reworks and buffs to these from the other two pre-specs. I covered Holy and Discipline in previous videos, so if you are interested in what changes happened to them, make sure to check those videos out as well. Hopping in, as with all specs, we have lost an Azerite trait, Thought Harvester. Lost is a strong word. It's essentially been reworked with a new effect and icon. Now it will address Vampiric Touch once again, but in a more productive way. It will increase its base damage and give it a chance upon ticking damage to increase the damage of the next Mindseer by 150%. Obviously an AoE focused trait, which is nice because Shadow has suffered in Mythic Plus, and buffing the AoE damage it can put out is a good step taken to address this aspect. Two other traits we are getting are the universal ones you can get on Holy and Discipline as well. One of them is Death Denied, that buffs Leap of Faith to give the target a shield and have its cooldown reduce faster while the shield holds. And the second is not actually new, it's Twist Magic, and it's getting its healing component nerfed by quite a bit, to be honest. But with these out of the way, we can actually address the changes to existing traits. Death of Shadows, which applies to Discipline as well, will get buffed. When Shadow Word Pain deals damage, it adds a stack of the buff up to 30. Casting Shadow Mends will consume the stacks and heal additionally for each stack. Chorus of Insanity has been nerfed. The trait essentially gives you a stack of critical strike buff for each stack of Void Form you had while Void Form was active. The strength of the buff will be reduced by about 50%, which is probably changed to align with the major buffs Void Form received previously. Searing Dialogue has received an additional effect. On top of its already present buff to Mindseer, it will also snare enemies by 30% if they are hit by Mindseer. Lastly, if I'm reading this right, Whispers of the Damned is getting reworked. Mind Blast and Shadow Word Void will deal more damage and also generate 20% more insanity when they crit. These are all the changes addressed to Shadow Priests for the moment. I heard people saying it's super good and others not yet convinced Shadow has been treated fairly enough. What do you guys think? I actually like the changes, and coming from someone who raided with Shadow Priests, I can say for sure they were pulling their own weight back in 8.0. I really think they will do a lot better in 8.1. I hope you guys found the video useful, and I appreciate you sticking all the way to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe and do all that YouTube jazz. It actually helps the video and the channel out, and I will be eternally grateful. Well, but eternally is a strong word. Let's just say I won't cry myself to sleep tonight. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Peace.